Good afternoon and welcome to the Daily Friend Show this Monday. I am not Nicholas Lorimer. I'm Sara Gon, standing in for Nicholas Lorimer, who hopefully is been having a bit of a rest, taking a long weekend, and I think he will be back tomorrow to fresh and bright as a daisy. But today I'm on the podcast with Michael Morris. Michael, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. Always a pleasure to join you, Sarah.
And Terence, believe it, great pleasure to have you here.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Today we are going to look at a couple of interesting areas. And the one in particular is a story that, as Terence has pointed out, has had quite a lot of traction, perhaps more so than one imagined it would. Rob Hersov, billionaire, businessman, and shall we say agent provocateur, spoke at the Biz News conference in September. And he's fairly blunt and outspoken about his feelings about the ANC and what they are doing or not doing for the country. And his presentation was, shall we say, blunt, and included the phrase, the ANC must footsack. In response, surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, a lot of people were very angry about this on a number of levels. One is the tone and the manner of addressing the issue. And the other was generally feeling that business, could not lecture to government. The two are very different. They don't operate in the same way. Businessmen do not make good politicians. And less said, but politicians do not make good businessmen. So Terence waded in and decided to write on it and on a couple of occasions. And the third occasion was today. We have Terence's article on the Daily Friend, wading in yet again because this astonishing story is we all thought would die a death has not died a death. Terence, where are we now? And why are we where we are?
Well, I'd say that this is a story that seems to be in businessmen's terms, an investment that keeps on paying its dividends.
Yeah.
I know it's a month since Rob Hersov made his comments, and they're still being spoken about. I actually wrote that piece because there was something on EWN by Yonela Diko, who has positions in government and I believe also in the Western Cape ANC. Where he berated Hersov for trash talking the government and said, he doesn't get it, and that politics is about persuasion, not power, which seems to contradict what I learned, I think, in my first ever politics lecture at university, that politics is the study about the exercise of power. But who am I to argue with that? But I was sympathetic up to a point. He made the comment about business people and politicians work in different spheres, and I said, I made that point back in 2016. My frame of reference then was, funnily enough, Herman Mashaba, Donald Trump, and Cyril Ramaphosa. These are all business names that we're going to step in and solve the problems. And I made the point at that time that what makes you a good businessman does not necessarily make you a good politician, and vice versa. Where business and politics, or business people and politicians, have a cooperative relationship, or business and government, perhaps better said, there can be benefits to that. And it has been said, and I think I've said it myself, one of the problems in South Africa is that we don't have that sort of cooperative relationship. Now, I say cooperation, not collusion, because that becomes every bit as bad. And my sense of it is not that that Hersov was saying that he could do things better, but that the people who are supposed to be doing them are doing them badly. And I think that Diko got it completely backwards. For the ANC, effectively, politics is about power. It's about having power. It's about accumulating power. It's about using power, but to what end? In fact, I think that's very much baked into our political culture, power as opposed to governance. War cry, mantla. What does that mean? And that's chanted constantly. So yeah, and I think that as a citizen with a voice, it's not only admissible, but perhaps positive that you have someone being willing to speak in very unambiguous tones. I think our former colleague John Kane Berman used to make comments about how South African business never met a government it didn't like. I think someone said something about the same thing about how elements of the press managed to transfer their loyalties from the NP to the ANC without missing a single goose step. So yes, I think that it's good that we're having these colors being nailed to the mast. And it's an issue that I wrote about a week ago, and I said, you have people criticizing Herself for saying, well, he's not being constructive, and we've got to work together and whatever. Cliche, boilerplate. We've heard this all before, but maybe the hard reality of our predicament is that is just not possible.
Perhaps perhaps I can, Michael, put it to you. He seems to have been supported by another straight shooter in Neil Froneman of Sibanye, who has been one of the few business people to come out critical of the government, not in the same quite the same tone as Rob Herself, but he agreed with what Rob Herself said. And Neil Froneman said, we are so past the point of being diplomatic and being overly cautious and being afraid that a license may be taken away, etc. What's your feeling on that? Are we? Has the government earned the opprobrium that's being expressed?
Yeah, I very much think so. And it was a point I think that Terence raised first in, I think, your Newsy piece, in your initial reaction to, or was it perhaps in the News 24 piece, in reaction to Oscar van Heerden, who also wrote it, and was kind of, van Heerden was queasy about, the bad language, and, is this really the kind of public debate we want? And, it's all terribly embarrassing and sort of puts our teeth on edge. And Terence's point was, well, perhaps precisely because things are so bad, we must dispense with politics. Politics is now no longer a useful a factor in our politics or in our public conversation. And I think the point that the IRR has made repeatedly, and both of you have written a great deal about this, as we all have, is that ultimately, the ultimate victims of the going along and the getting along and the appeasing and the politesse and the pulling back from saying harsh things, the ultimate victims of all that are the very people who were meant to be the primary beneficiaries of the liberation, and we're the ones. We get blamed for being alarmist and right wing and all the rest. Terence has written about this too. On the land front, where we make warnings, somebody will pop up and say, "Oh, you're being alarmist," and that what stands behind our argument, which is not the kind of Trumpian right-wing position that so many of our detractors seem to want to try and pin to us, is simply the prospect of a better life for all those millions of people who happen to be black, are still, so many of them, far too poor, and all because of failing and dysfunctional policy choices, bad policies, bad governance, and so on. The time, as Froneman and Herself have now suggested, and Terence has written, the time perhaps now is for us actually to be able to be frank with one another, and to say, let's actually just talk about what's really happening, and this is it.
Well, Terence, come back to your point about the power of politics. You have a mining industry that says, if there weren't the level of problems we had, they could have put 100 billion into the economy this year. And it's emblematic of the fact that politicians have an enormous amount of power, because whatever business does, even if they do it very well, if you've got the sort of strangulation of policy that we have, it's going to either be strangled or it's going to eventually peter away and find more attractive shores to invest in.
Yeah, I think that I think it was Deco, that may have been Dr. Van Heerden, but I think it was Mr. Deco. He said something about, well, this is all sour grapes because the government isn't doing what he wanted it to do. And up to a point, that may be a legitimate criticism of business, that you want A to Z, and you're never going to get all of that. You've got to live with it. That'll be okay. I think that all of us would like the world to be personally arranged around our desires. But when the foundations are eaten away. Astral Foods in Standerton, that had to put its own water reticulation plant up, or Clover in Lichtenberg that went to Durban. We've got such catastrophic problems with our rail system, that a lot of what should be shifted by rail has to go by trucks. So now there's a strike at Transnet.
That's coming next.
Funny enough, this morning I watched an episode of Carte Blanche on YouTube about the liquidator's office. Apparently, let's just say that looks like state capture still a game. This still a thing, still a game in town. And I think one of the ironies here is that actually I don't particularly like the way that Rob Herschel phrased things. I'm not given to that sort of to that sort of expression. It's one reason why you will not find a Terence Corrigan burns his opponent's video on YouTube,
or Twitter for that matter.
Massive Twitter.
You take out the last three letters of Twitter, and I think you're in business. But I think that there is something delusional about saying, well, we must all just work together.
My worst phrase.
Maybe that it's some sort of believability in 2003. I don't think it has any believability now. Say what you want about the Mandela and the Mbeki presidencies, and I've seen some very harsh things, particularly about the way Thabo Mbeki managed the country. And I think I think also we are paying for some of the big shifts of direction under Mandela now, particularly deployment. But they had cabinets where people had sufficient life experience and a pragmatism and a realization of the workings of the world, that they could overcome some of their baked-in beliefs. Joe Slovo may have spent his life flying the hammer and sickle, but apparently he was actually quite reasonable when he dealt with banks about housing. In fact, there's been some interesting things written about why you see this kind of faux uncompromising radicalism amongst the ANC Youth League, or what's now the Economic Freedom Fighters, because to a significant degree, these people didn't really experience what life and politics prior to liberation. There is a romance that somebody who actually maybe spent a couple of years in prison, didn't feel about that. It's good that we have that behind us.
Well, that allies into the next topic, because I mean, the thing about business is it doesn't expect everything from government. It's generally creative. It gets around the gaps, the problems. I think the problem is, however, we've just reached the point where there's nowhere to go. And in this case, we're looking at the Transnet strike, and because the strike at Transnet is at the ports, it employs about I think Transnet, in that respect, employs about 55,000 people, of whom over 40,000 are now on strike. Now, the crisis here, I mean, crisis is crisis anyway, but the real crisis here is that the Transnet has virtually single-handedly destroyed the rail network, which of course impacts on businesses that rely on moving moving goods or resources. The ports have slid down to the bottom of the rankings in world terms, and now you've got 40,000 people on strike, which the Labour Court says is not unprotected. So over 40,000 people on strike in a situation that is almost barely working to start with. The port authorities have said that there are depots that are working, and the business is saying, no, they're not. Any depot that is working is a private depot. Michael, this just seems, I mean, one can understand people striking for higher wages in the conditions we live in, but this seems like lunacy on top of everything else.
Indeed. And picking up on the point, the theme of Terence's comments a moment ago, one of the key facts to put into the discussion about striking Transnet workers is the very recent comment by the Minerals Council of South Africa, the main sort of mining industry lobby group, estimating that South Africa lost out on revenue of 50 billion rand this year because of logistics bottlenecks at Transnet. And here's a very vivid illustration of the fact that what business wants is in fact not inimical to the national interest or to the interest of workers or to the interest of people who want jobs or food on their table and so on, or even indeed the interest of the ANC. Business wants the thing to work. And it's not some sectarian kind of free market, radical ideological point of view that it's trying to make a case for. It's simply trying to make a case for getting things to work. And then in this particular context, to come back to your question, I think it's always legitimate for unions to speak up for their members, and particularly in this day and age, or in just the present economic climate, to worry about what people are earning and so on. But surely there is a bigger picture here. Surely the unions have the scope to sit down and say, our entire industry is in crisis. Let us, in fact, use our whatever power we have, do something towards that objective. That surely is going to be serving our own and our members' interests far better. I don't know whether I'm simply being romantic and sentimental about these things, and sometimes perhaps I am, but it does. I mean, we are living in a time of critical dysfunction. 50 billion lost in 1 year to logistics bottlenecks at Transnet. This is surely something that can be fixed. It's not rocket science, and it just does. It sits badly that here we have this powerful political and union organization prepared to take a stand, but in a way that's surely only going to make things worse.
Terence, is there the sort of overwhelming sort of NDR antipathy towards capitalism a serious element in all of this? I mean, there were discussions around businesses sort of being responsible for certain parts of the railway infrastructure, which the businesses themselves, the mines, were prepared to pay to repair, and a lot of them need repair. But the contracts the government was offering were 2 years long. I mean, no business is going to spend what would be probably hundreds of millions, if not billions of rands, investing in something that they could lose in 2 years' time.
Yeah, look, I think that hostility to capitalism is a factor, but I think that there's also a schizophrenia here. You can point to the way President Ramaphosa described, the private sector creates jobs, government doesn't create. So yeah, it bounces backwards and forwards. I think sadly this is probably got less to do with ideology. I think the ideology is a kind of macro picture. It puts brakes often indirectly on policy options, and it's the reason why we can always talk and engage, but certain things just are effectively off the table, irrespective of what any evidence might say. But I think that it's sort of a reluctant concession. Now, a phrase I prefer to use, terms like socialist or communist or whatever, I think they have very particular meanings. I think that you can take the ANC and I think describe it as statist. And I think that applies to, various traditions within it. Some of whom would like to see East Germany circa 1960 being resurrected in South Africa. Some of which, really enjoy the BMWs and, the trappings. And, if given a chance for an overseas holiday, it's likely to be, Aspen or Switzerland as opposed to the sun-soaked beaches of Havana. Except maybe the sort of privately owned, resorts catering for German and Italian tourists. So yeah, yes, we'll concede that business can make a contribution, but we also want sort of maximum latitude. So yes, maybe in 2 years we'll take it back. I think that there is a sense, and my thinking on this is very incomplete. But some years ago, I remember a friend of mine, who I would describe as a sort of a good suburban lefty, kind of a nice chap. Wrote something on his Facebook page about hands off my pension. Now, this is a guy who's entrepreneurial and save money and provides very well for his family. And I thought it was interesting, given that he's writes a lot about social responsibility. And I put a comment there. I think maybe this is where you, as a sensible person, even of left-leaning disposition, part company from the government, because they don't see that as your money. They see that as part of the national wealth that must be mobilized. That's a very, very interesting phrase, and it's something that I've heard for the last 20 years. We must mobilize our resources.
Yes,
it's like it's a question of who's mobilizing and who's marshalling.
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to make up for a glitch that I'm totally responsible for about mobilizing wealth, and that is we actually have a sponsor. And being unused to hosting, I should have put out this ad before, but I'm going to do it now instead. And that is to say that we all know that Bitcoin is the best performing asset of the past decade. And many people are accumulating Bitcoin as a strategy to hedge themselves against fiat currency debasement and government overreach. The guys at Bitvice have developed their latest product, SatStacker, to help you accumulate Bitcoin over the long term. SatStacker allows you to set up a recurring purchase order directly from your bank account. It then accumulates Bitcoin for you at the frequency and amount that you choose, depositing the Bitcoin directly to your own self-custody wallet. There are many use cases for SatStacker, from simply automating a weekly purchase of some Bitcoin for your own personal stack to setting up a long-term investment fund for your kids or your friend. Accumulating Bitcoin in automated, regular amounts has never been simpler, safer, and more convenient. Try out SatStacker today. So hopefully I have made up for ignoring the people who are paying our way. And that leaves me with 5 odd minutes for us to look at our last story, which I think mostly takes us away from the theme that has been recurring until now, and that is to look at the fact that federal judges, and that is judges who apply federal law, so it's above state and just below the Supreme Court of Appeals in America, that I think they're now looking at 14 judges have declared that they will not employ clerks, as they call them, from Yale Law School because they have no respect for or recognition of freedom of speech. So this is obviously a response to an environment where academia and those coming out of academia have followed, I suppose, what is in common parlance referred to a woke agenda, where one view, their view, is the only one that is either correct or must be heard, and the judges are coming back at this. And of course, they are judges, they are conservative judges. Is this a good thing? Is it a message that has to go out to academia, Terence, or is it something that, you know, some wokeistas from Yale Law School could learn something from being clerks to conservative judges?
You know, I think that okay, I tend to be a free speech fundamentalist. So anything from the left or the right that restricts it, and yes, I suppose, you know, we can sit here for hours saying, yeah, but what about this and what about that? What about the next thing? Okay, all protocol observed. You know, I look at it very skiff. Now I'm pretty sure that our Yale law school graduates wouldn't understand checking it skiff. So they go, I know more than they do at that school. Okay, so but okay, I think that it's a great shame if people of different ideological convictions cannot find a sort of common language or common areas in which to operate. That being said, if there is truth to what these learned judges are saying, and it's apparently said what 14 of them have now said they don't want graduates from the school, then that seems to me to indicate, something of a systemic problem, or at least a very definite perception of such a problem. And it seems to me also that, from what I understand about American society, the idea that they are cagey about free speech, that'd be deeply problematic. Ideally, I would hope that a situation would exist where one could take your experience, your CV, your academic qualifications, and say, well, is this an excellent person? Yes, as politics may lean left or may lean right. But does he or she add value? Something that I do think I would encourage every viewer of the show, get a movie called Shadowlands. Anthony Hopkins at his absolute best. He plays C.S. Lewis, who many of you may know as the writer of the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe. He was also an Oxford Don. And at one point he says to one of his students, "Fight me, I can take it."
Well, Michael, this is exactly the point. I mean, I sympathize with sending out the message, but I think that this might be a very American divide, because I don't think in South Africa the political views of a good student would get in the way. And perhaps with conservative judges, you've got years of experience in dealing with some of the real world in law outside of the academia. There's value to getting hold of these youngsters and disabusing them of some of their notions.
I absolutely agree. And I think, in a sense, I think there is a theme that runs all the way through today's program. And if we go right back to the very beginning, and that notion of politicking and avoiding having an argument, I think the thing that encourages me about this kind of story, and I certainly wouldn't, I'm not, don't really have a conservative bone in my body, but I think it's very helpful, very encouraging, very healthy that you do have people who are influential, who are in the public, quite prominent in public, and presumably are prone to certain vulnerability, who are willing to stand up and say, come on, we expect there to be a commitment to free speech. Let's fight it out. Let's be vigorous disputatious, and I think it encourages all of society to actually also sit up and think, and probably in much the same way as Terence writing about Hersoff and Hersoff himself and Froneman. So I think there is this. I think there is the theme, and I think it is that challenge to politesse, which is a fundamentally healthy thing.
Well, I would just end with. Sorry, Terence, you wanted to say something?
I'd just like to say from my own experience, I attended university in the early 1990s, and I had certain issues with texts, particularly about South African politics, which particularly in the sense that they tend to represent, the ANC as something different from everything else. The ANC says, therefore that is. However, I would say this: I don't think I ever was penalised for taking a contrarian view, and in fact, in the years following, I've bumped into lecturers who taught me, and one guy who was quite a militant Africanist, another chap who was an academic Marxist. Both said they actually quite enjoyed having me there, because it's so easy just to go along to get along. So you find people who, for the sake of getting your 65% mark on your paper, will just repeat what they have in lectures.
Yeah.
To find someone who sort of like recycles a shotgun and walks it. It's just, I'm not taking.
Well, I think the advantage of conservative judges is they can at least bring in an element of politesse, which I think a lot of the woke students are lacking. But having said that, we have come to the end of today's show, and I would encourage you to go to IRR.org to look at our reports, our campaigns, and anything that we've written about, and heaven knows we've written a lot. And also to read the Daily Friend, dailyfriend.co.za, and you don't have to agree with us. The comments section is there for you to use to your heart's content. Thank you very much, and hopefully you and everyone else will see Nick back tomorrow.